Well, for me, I feel that doctors have stopped respecting patients. That's how I see it, right? Patients have gone from being unique individuals who are, have got the right to worry about themselves and to make informed decisions. They've gone to being, units who have to do as they are told. And nothing else is available to you. You just take this.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Unmuzzled here for the 10th episode. I just recorded my 9th episode about less than a week ago with Abdullah, which I'm sure many of you still would recall, since that was quite an interesting chat that I had with him. A lot of really good points brought up by Abdullah in that one. And yeah, definitely one of, if not the longest episode on this series so far. So if you haven't managed to listen to that one, please do give it a listen before you go on to this one. So yeah, I'm now back with my 10th episode. I guess, just the following week, when it rains, it pours, I guess. So just very, very happy to be back. Now, my guest today has been loud and vocal on the socials, questioning and challenging the mainstream narrative on the pandemic, and rightly so. She is perhaps one of the most, if not the most credible and qualified persons to speak on the matter, from her extensive resume and background as a consultant histopathologist and statistician. Basically a physician with years of practice and about 20 years as an academic and researcher. One of the very few experts in the country who have done so since the beginning of the Malaysian government's and public health handling of COVID, from the ridiculous flip-flops on SOPs to downright unlawful vaccine mandates. And chances are you might have already heard about her or seen her on Twitter posting away, asking for nothing for more than just the honest truth from those held accountable. So it brings me great pleasure to welcome Dr Manimalar Selvi Naicker here on Unmuzzled. Dr. Mala, it is an honor to have you on. Thank you for joining me today.
It's a great pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. So, Dr. Mala, I'd like to just start with, is it okay if I address you as Dr. Mala?
Yeah, Dr. Mala is fine.
I'd like to just start with introducing you to our listeners a little bit. So you're a consultant histopathologist, a medical doctor with years of practice.
Yes.
And you've been involved in a lot of academic research.
Yes, I'm a what do you call a consultant histopathologist and statistician. So as part of being a statistician, I have been involved in a lot of research. But I wouldn't say, huge amounts, but that's one of the things that I'm supposed to be doing.
Okay. All right. And are you currently in retirement?
I recently retired, but my research projects are still ongoing.
I see.
Yeah.
All right. So let me just start with this then. Can you talk us through your experience as a consultant histopathologist and statistician, and what that means for laying out the data on COVID specifically? You basically crunch the numbers, right?
Yes.
And from COVID case analyses between the vax and unvax to cases of adverse events following immunization, or AFI for short, that has been something more recent that you've been you've been vocal about. Can you talk us through that?
Right. At the start of the pandemic, when they had the first lockdown for 2 weeks, I was very supportive of that, because I realized that we needed to get our medical infrastructure up to speed. But as time went on, and then we started having more and more of these lockdowns, then I started to question the need for all that, because good public health principles dictate that one of the most important aspects of fighting off an illness is your own immune system. And if you're going to keep people locked up in their homes for months with no exercise, no sunshine virtually, and some of them can't go out to work, which means that they can't buy themselves proper food and things like that.
Sure, yeah.
That didn't look like a good public health strategy to me at all. Right? And I am for things like the things that we can do, like masking, social distancing, work from home where it's feasible, a little bit of everything, so that we just reduce the disease burden as far as the numbers go, but not these outright lockdowns and children not going to school and things like that. So that is where I started questioning the what do you call it, the plan, the SOPs. And as far as the numbers went, see, the numbers keep changing depending on what kind of variant that we are seeing. So when the initial Wuhan variant came in, it was a lot of lockdowns, and also the numbers were small. Then when the Delta variant came in, then the numbers sort of spiked. And then now with the Omicron, the numbers are even higher. Yeah. But you see, the numbers being high doesn't mean that the disease burden on the healthcare system is equally high.
Yep.
Right?
But that is still the ongoing narrative, right? I was at the medical fraternity here in Malaysia, at least, that's still what they're pushing, right?
Yes. To some extent, that fear factor is still being played up. Not intentionally, perhaps, unintentionally. Because I suppose even the medical, the healthcare providers are also afraid of being deluged with patients. So I think it's not intentional, but there is some evidence of playing up of the dangers involved.
Fear mongering, I guess.
Not really fear mongering. I think they want to be cautious, but at the same time you have to still follow good public health principles.
Right. Okay, which has been missing essentially, right? Hasn't it? So you have essentially voiced out your dissent for the most part against, as you just mentioned, against the government's policies since the beginning of the pandemic, right? Since pretty much the onset
not all aspects of it, certain aspects of it.
Okay.
Like I'm very supportive of masking in public and social distancing. Right. I feel these are all little things that they're not 100% effective, but they help a little bit.
Okay.
And medicine is seldom a blockbuster kind of intervention. Most of medicine is a collection of smaller things.
Right. Okay. And since speaking up and being against some of the policies that they've rolled out, you've amassed a huge following across the social media platforms. You're on YouTube, you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook. So when you started speaking up and out, did you already have a presence on social media, or did you only start to feel compelled to speak up because the government has failed, from at least personally from how I see it, remarkably on being consistent and telling us the truth, keeping straight?
I did have a small social media presence in the sense that I had a YouTube channel basically dedicated to medical statistics. Right? But after the pandemic started, then I sort of converted my Facebook to a evidence-based medicine platform.
Right.
So we discuss all things evidence-based medicine on my Facebook.
I see.
And Twitter as well.
All right. And you still churn out your videos on YouTube, right? I've just started following you actually on YouTube.
Yeah, mainly. They are not. I don't know what sort of audience I'm aiming it at, but it's basically very technical, statistical stuff. So I do have a small audience.
Right. I think I started following you on Twitter. That's normally where I'm on, anyways, most times. And ever since you've been public and voicing out your concerns, it hasn't come without backlash. Obviously, you've received a lot of backlash. You have, and then they're not pretty. You've received attacks, and I recall some from off Twitter, since I'm there mostly. A lot of personal attacks, ad hominems mostly, thrown at you. How do you deal with the haters?
I don't deal with them at all, in the sense that I answer. If there's a scientific question posed, I answer that. or if they're saying something which sounds vaguely scientific, then I query them on it. But I don't respond to anything else.
Right. Right. And has that been the case, though? Them being objective and being able to argue you with solid scientific evidence?
Some of them, yes. The flow is mainly scientific.
Right.
I mean, they do throw in a few personal attacks and things like that. But in general, it is a scientific discussion.
Right.
So that kind of discussion I entertain.
Yeah.
But quite often it's just, calling me grandma or something like that.
Right. All these names and labels, yes. Typical.
Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to kind of go back to some of your recent Twitter posts. And I think, actually not just recent, but this is something you've spoken of quite a bit. I think you frequently do touch on the use of Ivermectin.
Yes.
As part of an early treatment protocol, which is something obviously the mainstream medical narrative hasn't been too keen on. Especially, I would like to stress on early treatment here. And as far as I know, in Malaysia, you are only one of 2 doctors who have publicly stressed on early treatment. The other one being Dr. Farid, who has, made it very public, that he offers or he prescribes Ivermectin to his patients as part of early treatment. So, you speaking up on this, on Ivermectin, goes some way back. I think even before maybe the last 2 known variants of COVID. And I saw that you shared your email written to another physician statistician. I think it was Professor Said Hatim.
Yes.
Yeah, speaking of, or I guess critiquing the recent KKM ITEC Ivermectin study. Right, on Twitter, you shared this. So what issue did you have with the study specifically? Which, by the way, for the benefit of all of you listeners out there, if you don't know, the study here by KKM argues on the ineffectiveness of Ivermectin for the treatment of COVID. So can you elaborate more on what you had to say on that?
Right. Now, the study chose the correct subset of patients. That means they chose people who are generally older and who had comorbidities. However, they gave to the cutoff point for giving the drug was set too late, right? So that means the last day of entry into the study was when you are day 7 post-symptomatic, right? So that's a little bit too late because this Ivermectin is supposed to act as an antiviral. And it's a 5-day course. So it's only logical if you give Ivermectin before or at day 3. So that will give you a few days, the 5 days window period to finish the drug. Because from day 8 onwards, you leave the viral phase and go into what is known as the hyperinflammatory phase. Okay. Right? And then from day 10 to 11 onwards is where hospitalizations start to occur. Right. So I felt that a certain proportion of the patients in the ITEC study were actually given the drug too late for it to act as an antiviral, right? So that compromised the study a bit. And secondly, by that time in Malaysia, Ivermectin had become so popular that people were buying it online. So in order to ensure that the groups were truly Ivermectin and non-Ivermectin group, the control group, they should have done a blood test at entry into the study, and at some point during the study, right? During the 5-day period, and they could have done it because these were hospitalized patients or patients who are being watched. Yes. Right. So that confirmation that the control group was not on Ivermectin was not done. So what is the effect of not doing it? Let's say somebody was taking Ivermectin on their own, surreptitiously, then what will happen is the effect size will get attenuated. Right. Okay. So it'll look as though Ivermectin is not working right? Actually, it's working, but then both arms are taking it. So the size of the benefit is not the real size. That was the other one. And then, of course, the bulk of my criticism was the statistical analysis, right? this is something that I've been criticizing for many years. Most doctors have simply no idea that classical inferential statistics, which we are taught, in your degree program in statistics or whatever, does not really apply to clinical medicine. Because there are so many prerequisites of classical statistics that we cannot do in clinical medicine. So, to me, the biggest problem with this study, other than the ones that I had mentioned, were the fact that this study was wrongly analyzed.
Right.
They calculated the sample size incorrectly, which led to a smaller sample being tested, and then it was wrongly analyzed. And, there were 3 times less deaths on the Ivermectin arm when compared to the control. So how can that be anything but endorsement of Ivermectin? At the very least, even if it's not a raging success, but the side effects of Ivermectin are really it's got a safe drug. It's got a good safety profile. So it may not have been even if it doesn't do a very good job, at least it's not safe, and it's worth a try because you're going to have 3 times less deaths.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to an average person, if you go and tell him that your chances of dying without Ivermectin are 4% and dying with Ivermectin is 1.2%, what do you think the normal person will choose? So by saying things like Ivermectin doesn't work or is not recommended, you are denying the common man treatment which could potentially save his life. It's up to them to choose. It's not for the doctor to choose, right?
Right, and I think that relates very closely, or pretty much directly touches on the concept of informed consent, which is something that's been completely missing from medical practice, and especially on COVID for the last 2 years. Why is it missing? I mean, how have the medical doctors all completely... Excuse me? Is that my phone? Oh, sorry. That's... Right, sorry about that. Okay. So on the concept of informed consent, which is something that has been missing entirely, right, from our mainstream practice of medicine for the last 2 years. How can they be so dismissive of that? I mean, it just seems to me, as just a normal average person here, I don't have no medical background, just seems to me they have denied or just pushed aside the concept of informed consent, which is part of ethics in medicine, to really just push out the vaccines.
I think this disregard for informed consent goes back a lot longer than what we realize. It used to be that the role of the doctor, as far as EBM is concerned, the role of the doctor is to tell you the risks and the benefits, and then give you a profile of your illness and connect the two. And say this.
Just to go back to your point on EBM. EBM stands for
evidence-based medicine.
All right, thank
right?
You. Yeah.
So they'll tell you the risks and benefits of the drug itself or the therapy, and then they will tell you your profile, and then they will give you their advice and say that that's what you call personalized medicine.
Right.
So this looks like a good fit for you or it doesn't. But there are no promises, because a drug can work very well on person A and can work not work at all on the next person, right? So, and then leave it up to the patient to decide, whether he wants to take the risks that come with that drug or what do you call it, not.
Right.
But over the years, we have sort of developed a very paternalistic do as you are told or do as I tell you to do sort of attitude. We have begun to disrespect patients. And this is something that I have been quite angry and vocal about. It's not just the Ivermectin issue. In this pandemic, it also goes back to the vitamin C issue.
Right.
Right? Because at the time when the pandemic just started, we didn't know much about ICU care for these patients, and we didn't know much about the disease per se at all, right? So at that point in time, the issue of giving what was known as the Marek's cocktail or Marek's protocol, where basically they give you 2 kinds of vitamins and corticosteroids, came up. And you see, this has got a good basic sciences basis, because our body doesn't really produce vitamin C.
Okay.
Right? So when someone is sick, you do want to top up their vitamin C. And these are all just vitamins. We have tried this in much higher doses, so they are not really dangerous drugs. They've got good safety profiles. And there's basically no harm. And there was also a lot of evidence for it. One, Dr. Marek himself had done some studies on it, right? And he has been using it and he has been seeing good evidence. And there was another study called Citrus Ali, which again was wrongly reported. But even in that study, there was a benefit when it came to death. Those who had taken this cocktail, they had a lesser percentage of death than those who are not on this cocktail. So basically, there was a consilience of evidence, right? It all came together, and I would think that in a court of law, this would amount to what is known as strict proof for the fact that, vitamin C does help, right? It may not be a blockbuster, but it does help. Vitamin C, thiamine, and corticosteroids. And I received such a lot of pushback for that. For just advocating good old vitamin C, I received such a lot of pushback for that. And that was quite shocking to me, because it is, medicine is not one big magic bullet kind of thing. It's a combination of, what shall I say, therapies that deliver the effect that they're supposed to deliver. So that was my first, experience with the cyber attacks or whatever. And I was kind of shocked.
For just speaking up on vitamin C.
Yeah, vitamin C, And, people have there have been studies showing much higher doses of vitamin C being used on cancer patients. And this was like a very tiny, it's not a normal physiological dosing, but it's quite a small dose. So to me, it was like, the evidence is there. So why not allow the patients to get it if they want to.
If they so choose.
In 2018, the United States Congress passed a law known as the right to try. And in that, if the patient wants and the physician thinks it's a good idea, you can even try a drug which has only passed the phase 1 clinical trial. That means they have just done the basic screening for safety. They don't even know whether it's very safe or not. What they know is you won't drop dead on the spot. So that's your phase 1 safety trials. And there were patients who wanted the drug, and they were not able to get that what's known as a Marek's protocol. So that was quite shocking to me.
And this is somewhat similar, I think, at least from what I've read, to the FLCC. If I'm not mistaken,
I've heard of them.
Protocol
FLCC
as well.
protocol.
I think it's the frontliner.
They advocate a combination of drugs, and most of these drugs are, they've got good safety profiles. See, you must make a distinction between drugs which have been used for a long time and have known good safety profiles. You see, so these are the kind of drugs you're not worried if they don't exhibit great efficacy. Even if the efficacy is small, it's okay. They are safe. So you combine them with other things, and you basically take the patient over the finishing line kind of thing.
I see.
So, and these doctors, they are not some cranks or quacks. They are all people with highly credentialed people. They are not going to put their names and reputations online, hawking something which does not work at all, right? I mean, it doesn't work in every single person, but obviously it's been working in enough people to convince them that it's worthwhile giving it a try.
Exactly. And ironically, all this talk about proven medicine and supplement, to me, they're just really supplements that people normally take anyway. It's never been controversial. Despite the overwhelming evidence that these things have been useful and harmless almost for the majority of the population all these years, yet in the same breath, they're trying to push out the vaccines that has not been around for that long and only received emergency use authorization. How does that logic work? That's what I have issue with.
I have issues with that too. You see, because for me, you are saying that, an old drug which has been around for decades, and we know its safety profile, right? Okay, it may not be so efficacious on its own, but it probably does no harm as well. And you are saying no to that, and you are telling everyone to take a vaccination. Doesn't matter. It's a medical intervention, which is very new. There seem to be some sort of massaging of the facts here. See, because this mRNA, I'm talking about mRNA. I'm not talking about the inactivated Sinovac, because that has been around, for many years. That particular technology. So, firstly, COVID-19 itself is a new disease. So, we do not know how any vaccine to this disease is going to pan out.
Right.
Number two, the mRNA platform itself is not old technology. I mean, the technology is old.
Right.
But its use in humans is, it has never been commercialized. There's never been a vaccine before which has been used on the public outside of a clinical trial.
And especially on this scale.
On this
also,
scale.
Yeah.
And, being a lab medicine physician, the first thing that when I was told that we are going to use an mRNA vaccine, I looked back on the history of this vaccine. Now, Moderna started an influenza trial, I think sometime in 2015.
Oh, okay.
Right? And influenza is like COVID-19. There are millions of cases and thousands of deaths and hospitalizations. So they should have been able to complete that trial without any difficulty. They could complete the COVID-19 trial, they could have completed that as well. Right? But until the current COVID-19 vaccines came out, they were not able to go past, I think, the first or second phase of the clinical trials. So that sort of rang a lot of alarm bells for me. Why is it so difficult to get this trial off the ground? It's different when they wanted to try it on rabies. It'll be very difficult to get participants for a rabies study. I mean, who gets rabies?
Yes,
I mean, that will be quite a difficult thing to get. But influenza, in the Western Hemisphere, it's so common. People die every year.
I mean, it's
influenza.
a seasonal thing anyway.
Yes. So that study should have been up and running many years ago. So to me, it was quite, puzzling that they are not able to get the influenza study out, but in record time they're able to get the C19 study out, right? So, but okay, never mind. And secondly, it was only issued as a emergency use authorization. Okay, that's fine because we are in a pandemic. So, there were some shortcuts there. But what really upset me was, you were asking everyone to take the vaccine. But a simple thing like making the AEFI reporting mandatory was not done. Right? So there's no, you're pushing the vaccine, but you are not, you have not done anything to get the what do you call it, the feedback. Right? So if you don't make it mandatory, then many doctors will not report it. One, it's laborious. It's a lot of work. Number two, a lot of doctors also fear reporting AEFI. Right? Because, you see, this is a patented product. It is somebody's business model, if you want to call it that. Right? And if you complain about it, won't the owner of that product get angry with you? And, you see, pharma getting angry with doctors is not something unknown. We know from a 2009 or 8 trial in the Australian High Court that one of the drug manufacturer had actually sent out emails saying that they want to pursue and neutralize doctors who spoke ill of their product. So, do you really think that we doctors want to say anything bad about anybody's patented product if we can help it? Right? We are afraid too. So, and for the government or whoever was in charge of the AFI reporting to ignore that, that was very unprofessional. Because you know that these things have happened. And you know that pharmaceutical companies, they are not really the most ethical businesses around. These companies have been fined billions of dollars by the United States Department of Justice for things like fraud, hiding information, bribing doctors, and things like that. So you are dealing with people who are, scary.
Yeah.
So if you don't make AEFI reporting mandatory, a lot of doctors are not going to report it. Now, you hear me speaking about this, you hear me sounding bold and brave because I'm not seeing patients in the front line.
Okay.
Now, had I been seeing patients and I was forced to report AEFI, I don't know whether I'll be this bold and brave. Right? Because they are scary, these people.
Yeah, they're being pressured not to really...
No, nobody's actually directly pressurizing you, but would you be very happy to go and report, give a negative review to some patented, whatever it is, like a water heater or anything? The manufacturer is going to get angry with you for publicly saying these things.
So, I mean, shouldn't it be the other way around? Like, Big Pharma should listen to what the doctors have to say, rather than the people who make the medicine, people who make the drugs, tell them what drugs you have to use.
Exactly.
That's how it should be, right?
You see, in the 80s and 90s, we were very cautious about new drugs. We were taught to be very cautious after the thalidomide tragedy. We were taught not to trust pharma. We were taught that new drugs, you have to wait 20 years to know the full safety profile of a new drug, one generation. But over the last 10, 15 years, it has become like we have become cheerleaders for pharma.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen from the outside, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
seems like
we have
a lot.
become cheerleaders for pharma, and things got so bad in the US, and doctors were misbehaving themselves that during President Obama's tenure, I think in 2010, they were forced to come out with what is known as the Physician Sunshine Payment Act, where doctors and pharma were forced to reveal the amount of money paid out to doctors to act as pharma shills.
Right. So these shills, they exist.
Yes,
very
they
much,
exist,
right?
and that's how the U.S. Congress has taken care of the shills. That is not by putting a stop to it, but by exposing them in the sense that it's now, if when someone says a good thing about a drug, you can go and check whether they have received any money from pharma.
Right.
And we don't have that law in Malaysia.
No. All right.
So a Malaysian doctor can be a pharma shill, but
keep quiet about it.
Yeah, and the public will not be aware of it.
And there's no public or legal recourse to reveal them. I mean, it kind of reminds me of a case that I read of, probably not so recent, but I think in the last maybe 6 months, of a case that made it to court about I think it was 4 NHS doctors in the UK who eventually were caught being paid by I think it was probably one of the big pharma companies, and basically they switched the drugs to obviously to prove one or to sell, make the one drug more available, and push the drug out to their patients over another for a certain treatment. I think it was probably cancer, but it involved 4 NHS doctors. And this it made it to...
I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
No worries. But it kind of reminds me of that case where, there are countries in the West where, as you just mentioned, there are, legal recourse available. I mean, there's laws around it, but we don't quite have it here in Malaysia, which I think is troubling, isn't it?
Yes, it
is. It's a high time, and especially as you just listed.
It is. In fact, when I first mooted the idea that, we should bring this law to Malaysia, I was actually thrown out of a doctors group for saying it.
Oh, okay. Wow,
I've been thrown out from a lot of doctors groups for saying things like this.
Right.
Yeah, because
they don't really want to hear it.
Yeah.
Do they? Right. So another thing I kind of just want to move on to, is the reverse transcription of the mRNA vaccine, which has been studied on, and also a paper written on it by a group of, I think it was Swedish researchers, right? I believe they studied the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, the mRNA one. And it says that on reverse transcription of the mRNA vaccine, it's likely, at least from what they've seen in vitro. And we've spoken of on that at length in a different interview recently. But I'd like to just revisit that if you don't mind. From just my own observation and my following of doctors around the world and other experts, immunologists, vaccinologists, they've raised this concern way before this paper came out, which was, I think, only back in February this year, wasn't it? And some of them have called this as early as last year, 2021. And this kind of brings Dr. Robert Malone to mind, who has now been censored and completely barred. I think his account has been suspended and removed from off Twitter, at least, for raising these kinds of issues. And I remember him talking about the cytotoxicity of the spike protein and the potential of the lipid carriers, the LNPs, used in these mRNA vaccines. So that's more on immunology, right? But I guess you can touch more on this issue of reverse transcription of the mRNA vaccine. This is very crucial information, right?
Yes, it is. You see, what they did was they used cancer cell line, and they were criticized for using the cancer cell line, but that was absolutely the right cell line to use, because this is what is known as proof of concept. You want to know whether the synthetic modified RNA can become biological DNA. So that was the question that they wanted to answer, and they answered that, right? Let's say they had done it on a non-cancer cell line. It still would not answer that question, right? Is it possible or not? Now, if you want to ask the question, is it probable or not, then you would probably want to use non-cancer cell line to see how frequently it happens in a more normal situation. Now, but that also is not so worrying to me. The thing that was worrying was the fact that this vaccine can go and trigger an intranuclear gene. You see, this line 1, which they have measured, is within the nucleus. It's an intranuclear gene. And this seems to be able to trigger that to, transcribe and translate into protein. So, and they have measured that. Right? So my question is, what else can this thing trigger? We have not measured other things. So what else can it trigger? And being a histopathologist, the thing that is, and I received a lot of flack for that, and on TikTok video that went viral. See,
what was the flack exactly? Well, I mean, how did they attack you?
The usual, granny. Kind of stuff. And, asking me whether I'm a immunologist and all that. But I said this study is a tissue or cell culture study. This is what histopathologists read day in and day out. I'm just commenting on my area of expertise. I read studies like this all the time, right? And I use stains like immunohistochemistry, and then we report out on in situ hybridization. So this is something that I understand, right? So that was the main worry. What else can this thing trigger, right? And the worst part is that Pfizer did not do a genotoxicity study prior to licensing,
right? And what's genotoxicity?
Where they look and see whether or not it can cause things like cancers or autoimmune disease, right? Genotoxicity is a big umbrella term for for a lot of things. So basically, does it do things that it's not supposed to be doing, right? That Pfizer didn't do that, right? And so when you see this kind of studies, it's very worrying. Right? Now, so the thing is, had they done those studies, prelim studies like this, they'd probably picked it up, and then we would have probably restricted this particular vaccine to older people. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is, I've been asking, as a histopathologist, I said, do we have the tools to, let's say this thing travels all over the place, either the mRNA vaccine or the protein travels to various parts of your body and causes, pathology there.
Yeah.
Do we have the tools to detect it? Do we have clinically validated immunohistochemical stain to pick up the proteins? Or do we have a clinically validated in situ hybridization to pick up the mRNA? Right? As far as I know, we don't. So when people say that the autopsy is negative and this is not caused by the vaccine, in those children who passed away soon after the vaccine.
Right.
And for me, the question is, how did you come to that conclusion?
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, it is possible that there is some stain that I'm not aware of, but I don't think so, because I've been keeping up with the literature, and as far as I know, there is no clinically validated tools like this. And some people have got their research tools.
Right.
Yeah, but that's different from something that we can use on our normal patients. Somebody comes for an autopsy. I mean, the body is brought in for an autopsy. Okay, do you have the tools to say that there was no spike protein anywhere near the heart, or there was no vaccine mRNA anywhere near the heart?
And I mean, just logic tells me that this is because the vaccines haven't been around long enough for them to identify the tools that you speak of, or at least to rule, to completely rule out whether this has been a case of adverse event following the vaccination, right?
That is one thing. Number two, vaccines are not really sort of associated with death. So for most pathologists, either histopathologists or forensic pathologists, most of us would never have done an autopsy on suspected vaccine death. Right. Right? I mean, in Malaysia, histopathologists also do clinical autopsies. And I've done a lot of autopsies. Right? Okay. But I've never come across a case where we were asked to, see whether this person died post-vaccine, whether the vaccine had anything to do with their death. In all the past vaccines. Right? I'm sure it happens occasionally here and there, but it's not like every time, every other day in the newspaper or on social media you're hearing about these things.
Right, correct.
So I really want to see any one of the autopsy reports that KKM has done, because I want to see. I've not seen anything. Yeah, I've not seen a protocol, right? And by right, this protocol should be up so that all the Malaysian histopathologists and forensic pathologists can give their feedback on it, because different people are reading different things, so we can give feedback on what we have read.
Right.
But so far I've not come across that. Right. Yeah. So that's what I've been asking the government, can I have a copy of the protocol? Right. What stains were used? Right. Things like that.
And they've not responded.
So far, no.
Right. I mean, that's just what I would assume as a layman anyway, like this investigation, the post, this autopsy to determine whether the vaccine had anything to do with the death, that should be entirely independent from our public health institutions.
Yes.
Right?
In fact, they should get the retired histopathologists and retired forensic pathologists to do it as an independent body.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Right? Of course, in some countries, you may have forensic pathologists who are in private practice. I'm not sure. But in Malaysia, we don't really have a private forensic service as far as I'm aware. So this was a good time to get all those people to, gather them together, brief them on what, how they're supposed to do the autopsy, because we have to know where are we going to take sections from the heart, how many sections should we take, what are the stains that we are supposed to do, and these things keep being updated all the time. New information is coming. So they could have formed an independent task force to at least look at the young people who died post-vaccination. True. Right? Yeah. It may not be very profitable to look at the old people who died, because they've got other illnesses as well, and sometimes it'll be a bit difficult to separate out the contribution of vaccines from their pre-existing disease. But definitely young people. One of those young people who died was a young Malay boy who was a professional diver. He had a diving certificate. And then that a young Indian boy who died, I think he was about 13 or 14 years old. He was a taekwondo. Kumar, I think,
very active in school. Nothing wrong with him at all.
Nothing wrong with them. So when these people, these are very unexpected deaths. They were well prior to this intervention. So at least these deaths should have been handled by an independent team of pathologists and histo and forensic pathologists. I mean, we do have enough retired people around, right? And maybe we could have got some from overseas as well to advise.
Right.
Yeah.
But it just seems like, just reading from mainstream news, that it seems like the only authority that matters now is just the public health, public health figures, and obviously KKM, and that you can't listen to anyone else.
Yes.
Which is obviously, I think, in the long run, in the future, it's going to further discourage people from speaking up.
And not only that, discourage people who should be receiving the vaccine from receiving the vaccine.
Right.
You see, when things like this occur, it has to be dealt with swiftly and in a transparent manner. Right?
Transparency.
Yeah, so people know, okay, let's say an independent body of histo and forensic pathologists come out and say, we see no evidence that, this child has some pre-existing thing, or we don't see evidence. Then that will calm the public down. Then they'll know that, well, it is probably not connected. It is incidental. Right? But now, even I am worried about the vaccine.
Yeah.
And recently, CDC has come out to say that the incidence of myocarditis in young males, 12 to 17, is anywhere from 22 to 36 per 100,000.
Right.
And this is very similar to what Hong Kong was saying back in September of 2021.
Right.
Before we started our vaccine drive for young people, Hong Kong had already published this, and they had reduced the dose from 2 to 1 for this age group.
Because I've been following, a lot of mostly sports news. I follow a lot of tennis, and even separate from tennis, I've been hearing a lot about young footballers just pretty much dropping dead on the field, and mainstream media has just been putting it aside as coincidence. Like there's obviously some other thing that has been causing these sudden deaths, but I don't know. There is, there comes a point where you kind of, it's very obvious that you have to just question how many more coincidences are there gonna be in the. I mean, are we gonna just see young people dropping dead, and especially so fit young people, athletes who have been conditioned, they've been training and been conditioned for a very active lifestyle, more than the average person, and yet these are the people who just, literally just dropping dead.
Very true.
Yeah, and recently, I think it was at the Miami Open. I think 15 players withdrew from the main draw, and this is completely unheard of. You never normally get that many players dropping out from or retiring early from a tournament like that, and it's just been ongoing. You keep hearing about these cases, but they're just being brushed aside. And all these young people who die post-vax, right, whether it's coincidental or not, we have to understand that this is a brand new vaccine, and we have to do a thorough and transparent autopsy. Right? We already know it can cause myocarditis. Yes.
Right? And myocarditis can cause death.
Yes.
Yeah, we already know that. So trying to not having an independent commission or an independent committee is, I think it's going to frighten the public. It's going to look like, either people are not, the medical establishment is not serious about it, or worse, the public might think that, are they trying to cover up something?
I think it's obvious at this point. It's the latter, the covering up.
I don't know. Having been a doctor for 30 years, I tend to think of it as incompetence. I think there's a lot of incompetence when it comes to evidence-based medicine. People don't really know how to connect the dots and things like that. So that is also at play here. It's not, I don't think it's a cover-up per se. I think a lot of it has got to do with incompetence. Okay.
All right. Now, I want to also touch on something you've spoken up against, which is the proposed amendments to the Poisons Act 2020. So it's slightly different from the vaccines and the COVID in general. But So for those of you who don't know, if this bill, it gets passed, it just basically gives more monopoly to Big Pharma from more government intervention. That's basically what it means, right? And not to mention the potential to abuse enhanced power by the government enforcers, since it deals with regulating the import, possession, manufacture, storage, transport, sale and use of certain medicines and psychotropic substances. So it's no longer quite the free market anymore, right? And given this context, it means that the small guys can't really compete then, can they? And in the process, what it does to us, the consumers, the patients, it dilutes or even removes our freedom to choose what drugs and treatments we choose to have for ourselves, with informed consent. Again, something that's been missing for the past 2 years. Doctors, I believe, within their ethical, practice of medicine, should be able to prescribe medicine they see fit for their patients. This would absolutely make it difficult, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. See, the first thing is, of course, the economics of it. Of course, I'm not an econs expert.
Sure.
But just looking at it from a common sense perspective, Malaysia has got a population of about 30 million, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a very small market for giant pharma companies from countries like India. Number two, we are not a high income nation either, so we are not a favorite destination for all these companies, right? Mm-hmm. So what will happen is we will have drugs in our market because the drugs have to be brought in by businessmen, right? The patient, you can't bring in a drug, so we will have a narrower range of drugs, and these drugs might be more expensive. So for example, if you had hypertension and you're given a prescription, you go to the pharmacy, you have no choice but to buy an expensive drug because you don't have a cheaper drug available.
Yes.
Right? Or let's say you have got a condition which is quite rare, but the most suitable drug for you is not in the market because it's not profitable for any pharma company to bring it in. There may be only 100 patients with that disorder in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. So for a country like Malaysia, which is small, you need to allow doctors to self-import or directly import certain drugs, either because they are cheaper or because they are not available in the country. Yes, we do need some safeguards and some regulations, but if this drug is being prescribed in India freely or US freely, there's no reason to not allow it into Malaysia. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to put obstacles to bring it into the country. That means it's being used freely all over, the civilized world. And the other thing is that, but of course there's the other side where you must make sure that the manufacturers of the drugs that are being imported have got, they fulfill this good manufacturing practice terms and conditions. So you have to train doctors to make sure that they are buying from reputable pharmas, but at the same time allow them to bring in the drugs that their patients need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think mostly this Poisons Act, what it's supposed to do, as far as I understand, is to discourage and prohibit the smuggling. Right, that's the smuggling of dangerous drugs and drugs that are not licensed and have not been regulated. Right, but it's kind of what it's done is just give more power to the government to kind of decide. I think we are, when it comes to medicine, I feel that the government is becoming a bit overbearing. Oh, that's only, it's obvious from the last 2 years, yes.
In the sense that the patient sitting in front of you is a very unique individual. No government official, unless they have examined the patient, will know what is most likely going to work for that patient. Even the doctor who examines the patient also cannot guarantee anything.
True, yeah.
Much less a government official sitting somewhere. So a lot of it is by giving the risk and benefit and doing a personalized evaluation and getting informed consent. Right? Mm-hmm. So slowly all these, what shall I say, room for all this is being removed. I don't think there's any malicious intent. I think it's just more like a big bureaucracy,
red tape and
we as though the bureaucrat sitting somewhere knows best.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked quite a bit now. Actually, we're kind of moving right to the very end of the podcast. It's well over 50 minutes. So usually that's how long my episodes run anyway. So I guess just before I end, would you like to add to anything you've said? I mean, or at least, what is your general advice as a consultant, histopathologist, and which basically just makes you, to me at least, in my eyes, the most credible person, really. And you're pretty much like the most credible person who's been on my podcast to speak on this issue, which I've frequently raised, right? So your advice to the rest of us, how do we go about this? And more importantly, for me, my trust in public health and public health officials, including doctors and other medical practitioners, has gone from, 100% to like now almost not there anymore.
Yeah. Well, for me, I feel that doctors have stopped respecting patients. That's how I see it, right? Patients have gone from being unique individuals who are, have got the right to worry about themselves and to make informed decisions. They've gone to being, what shall I say? Units who have to do as they are told, and nothing else is available to you. You just take this kind of thing, right? That's number one. And I think patients should mobilize to ensure that doctors start respecting you all. Right? Nothing is going to change unless the public demand that doctors start respecting them again.
Right.
Number two, I think this issue of being pharma shills is very real. I'm not the one who coined the term, by the way. That was coined by a journal from Harvard Law School to describe the incoming FDA head of that time.
So this is coming from Harvard.
Harvard Law School, I think, was the one. I think so. I think they are the one who coined this, because I saw it in one of their journals, right? So we have to bring in the physician payment sunshine or something similar to it, to make sure that when a doctor speaks, the patient is able to look behind the speech and see whether it has been paid for by pharma.
I see.
Right? I think that's very important.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take this opportunity to warn the public and patients out there. If you don't do something to stop the doctors, you will soon find yourself with virtually no recourse. You'll be given treatments which may not be ideal or optimum for you, simply because that's all that is available. Take it or leave it. Or you may be pressurized to, take some form of medical intervention. It could be a vaccine, it could be something else, right? So if you don't do something to put doctors in our places, we are going to run roughshod over you.
Right.
And that is the conclusion I have come to after 30 years of practicing medicine. Okay. The public need to rein in the doctors. I'm sorry. I don't mean this in a disrespectful way to my colleagues, right? But this is my assessment of what has happened over the last 30 years, maybe.
Absolutely. And to me, those are just wise words of advice, and coming from a very experienced consultant like yourself. Dr. Manimalar, thank you so much for coming on to Unmuzzled today.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
It was an absolute pleasure, and
my pleasure too.
Looking forward to hearing from you soon as well. And that's it, folks. That's all the time we have for this one. Do tune in for my next one. Bye for now.